All right, so paper, my recent paper, that is just a draft right now, you had chance to read, is about Ukrainian widows and negative self-trauma as initiation and therapy as communion. I started to work on it, or rather, I started to talk with widows last summer when I was in Ukraine, and also read some of the narratives of them describing what they're going through. And this resulted in a paper and also substantially in a change of worldview for me. So what I was trying to do, we can call it existential, phenomenological existential approach. It's, at least in my interpretation, it's when you put a certain phenomena in brackets and you try to resist using pre-existent concept bias associated in this phenomenon. So without trying not to rely on pre-existed concepts in understanding this phenomena, really concentrate on what this phenomena is telling you, really listen to what it is. Instead of, and this is what I was trying to do with widows, to really comprehend widows and other trauma sufferers, people who are traumatized, to really start with seeing them, what they represent in the world, instead of trying to use predefined concepts to comprehend them. Which means if you use predefined concept without really listening or paying attention to what they represent, it's just a way of not seeing them. And this is what we normally do. We normally take concepts that already exist, certain categories, and traumatized people, widows, they fall, we use those categories to define them, which we would say they're traumatized, and there's certain notion of therapy comes with it. It's like clarifies everything. But what I was trying to do, I was trying to do the other way around, to start with what they represent, with what their narrative represent, and redefine in accordance with this listening. And understanding, redefine the concepts that we normally use that come in association, some of the concept that comes when we discuss this phenomena. And it's also important because this, let's imagine that this is in the center of the circle, because I was also trying to see widows as a quintessential, we can say, embodiment of a human being. Not saying that it is, well, actually kind of implying that it is quintessential embodiment of human being, like human being the way it is, at least within the scope of this paper. And I think it's important because normally in our therapeutic culture, at the center of existence, the ideal type of a human being, the human being that it's supposed to be is the one who is not traumatized, the one who is healthy, happy, without trauma. If you have trauma, it means something went wrong, you're deviating from this ideal human type. And I was trying to do the opposite, the other way around. What if this is how it's supposed to be? Or rather, what if this is how it is? Human life, human existence. And not to say that those who are not traumatized are deviation, but just really see it not as not using predefined concepts and not seeing it as a deviation. And I redefined certain phenomena, as you noticed. There is a self, which I arrived to understanding of self as interrelational, not isolated, instead of autonomous and non-relational, and self-affirming. So we can say negative comprehension of self. Trauma as initiation rather than deviation, and accordingly, therapy as, for lack of better word, communion instead of treatment. And I will go through all of those concepts and try to explain what I meant. So we start with the negative comprehension of self, conceptualization of self. Traditional perspective, they comprehend self relying of positive phenomena, positive features, like it's coherent, it is assumed that it's coherent, it's indestructible, and it's autonomous. And I was trying to see self through negative, opposite features as incoherent, mortal, and interconnective, not autonomous, through negative features. And some of the things that widows would say is that Tatiana Bondareва would claim that she died with her husband in Гуляй Поле, and we would perceive as a metaphor, but the point I was making is that what if it's not a metaphor? What if we won't take it metaphorically, but actually as something that literally happened, which would show how it's possible for self to disappear while one is alive in in one of the dimensions, but is actually disappear together with their loved one once they experience the loss. And Oksana Barkun would say that the future disappeared, this comprehension of self changed, the future collapsed, and the past collapsed, and the present is not also, present ends up going nowhere. So it's collapsed of the past of the self, of the present of the self, and of the future of herself as the result of her loss. And Oksana Makinon would say that outside it looks like she's sane, like she's alive, but within it's different. It's a new life, but it's something maybe self-destructive. It suffocates, it destroys her. And Daria Mazur and other widows would say that it's the time doesn't actually heal. It becomes maybe part of you. You learn to live with it. It just there. It's not going away the way we prefer to think that it's healing. Or in general, that healing is possible. So to comprehend self negatively, which I normally actually do, but here I would also add this interrelational important aspect. At least I will try to add interrelational aspects. So I rely on Lacan post-traumatic comprehension of self, that self is not, for Lacan, self, human subject as such, is post-traumatic subject. So the presence of trauma is constitutive for a subject. There is no subject without trauma, or we can say that anyone is already traumatized. Is that a matter of possibility of concealing it through illusion of coherence? So in any self, according to this negative perspective, there is the rupture, there is the rupture between old self and new self, and any coherence in comprehending self comes as an illusion of continuity. And but initially, this is the story of old self, rupture, and new self. And Malibu, I would also add Malibu's account of destructive plasticity with her concept of a living dead, who claims that at least some of the cells are a result of destruction, that destruction has formative power. It's trauma in this context. Trauma sufferers, they have new self, and she does call them living dead. Someone who went through the rupture with themselves, through death of their old self, and this rupture is what for Lacan is constitutive rupture, trauma of existence, becomes too vivid for them, hard to ignore. The illusion of coherence collapses. So self in this relation, unlike traditional accounts of self that show that self is coherent, autonomous, at the core, this contradicts this claim that it's not coherent. It can disappear while we are alive, still alive in another dimension, within the scope of someone's life. And traditional accounts of self would presuppose that within that self is not an illusion, that we are who we are. There is identity, it's indestructible, it might change with time, but substantially it's same identity, just transforming. And this account would say that there is a rupture in coincidence, which is constitutive to self, not the continuity of self. It's not just it changes, but substantially stays the same, identical, coinciding with itself. But it's actually the rupture, not coinciding with itself, which also means that self can disappear and is in a state of disappearance. It's maybe something self-destructive. And it means that it's mortal. Within the scope of one's life, it can die, and it's maybe we can say it's dying. So normally when we talk about trauma, we would say that trauma just, or some kind of influence of other people, good or bad, it just transforms self, but it cannot kill ourself. And this perspective would say that that self can be actually and is undergoing its demise. And I would quote Susan Bryson in her essay Outliving Oneself, where she's talking about trauma, and she's herself suffered from trauma. She would say that she helps with another aspect, challenges another aspect of incomprehension of self, traditional comprehension of self. That's she points out at the interconnectivity of self. She claims that traditional accounts of self are individualistic, meaning self is autonomous, and in contrast, she claims that it's interrelated. It's formed in relation to others and sustained in a social context. For me, it's important because even the negative comprehension of self, like Lacanian or Malabou comprehension of self, those comprehending self through negative features like indestructibility or mortality, they also, in a similar way, like positive accounts of self that point out how self is coherent and indestructible, they both lack interrelational dimension. It's about self, and no one adds the relationship of self with others, or how relationships are more even important than self, meaning they are in a way more real than self, and self is just illusionary. So I would I feel that it's reasonable to add the interrelative nature of self to the negative account of self. It's mortal, it's destructible, it's not coherent, but it's also interrelational. It exists as the intersection within relationship to others. And so it's both mortal and interconnected. And this quality of mortality and quality of interconnectivity, they also they coexist together. This is important. It's not only that your inner self dies and is constituted on rupture, it's also should be added here that itself as an instance of connections with others. So it's also this connection that kill you and destroy you and participate in the destruction of self. So interconnectivity as the important feature to add to self being mortal. In case of widows, it's when their husband disappears. It's also that they disappear, and it's not this disappearance is not metaphorical. It's we can say what literally happened, because self is not autonomous. So I would say here, as a summary of redefining self, that self is relying in defining self such attributes as incoherence, mortality, and dependence instead of positive ones, and it undergoes, we can say, annihilation at every moment of existence. And substantially, it's nothing else maybe than the annihilation of itself, negation of itself instead of affirmation of itself. And again, if widows represent the quintessential type instance of being human, this is what they saying. They're not saying only about ourselves, but they also, through talking out of the place of their trauma, we can say that they say something about each of us, something about those, including who perceive themselves as not traumatized. So this is the point in this part, this paper, even seeing ourselves, not only them, through trying to see it through their eyes, but also listen to them and find something about human existence as such. And this kind of redefinition of self based on their experience, their comprehension of self, or rather their loss of self, and loss as connected with loss of someone else. For me, it's informative about any human self, that it's approaching its end, it's that has destruction at its core, and this quality of destruction, self-destruction, is related to others. Unlike we prefer to think that we are autonomous and the loss of the loved one cannot kill us, unfortunately. And trauma as initiation, as always with the same picture, would coincide in a way with this comprehension of self, partially. As normally trauma is, because it's a part of therapeutic discourse, trauma is perceived as a subject of treatment. When we encounter trauma, the automatic response would be that we need to fix trauma. Something is going, and people who suffer from trauma, it's automatically that we think that they have to get rid of trauma, and the being traumatized is life, something in life went wrong and it has to be fixed. So this perception of trauma as deviation, that it's not how it's supposed to be. I was trying to see trauma as initiation instead. And if we think of self, that this is the basic structure of the self, the negative self, the self that includes rupture with itself, it's that it's mortal, that it's based on the rupture with itself. The initiation would be initiation into this, and the quality of seeing, of falling into the rupture, of not being able to have an illusion anymore of the coherency of self, of the continuity of self. So it's initiation, meaning witnessing in this dimension. And it's important because within therapeutic discourse, trauma is only perceived as something we need to be treated, something needs to be fixed, and it's denied completely the quality of revelation about existence. And no one listens to the voice of trauma. If you allocate yourself as a trauma victim, something like that, and you say something about your traumatic experience, it just going to be perceived as a subject of treatment, as your trauma talking in you, if you're too negative, for example, or manifesting agonizing pain. It won't be seen as a part of you. It would be seen as something to be fixed in you, and you would be seen as someone more positive. Just because I think it's hard to witness, if trauma is initiation into this, it's just hard to witness someone who represents this initiation. So it has to be stigmatized in order not to remain unable to see what trauma represents. So if we go along with a negative comprehension of self, the trauma, which means that trauma is co-constitutive with existence, then trauma would be seen as encountering particular instance of trauma would be seen as initiation. And in Lacanian perspective, because there is trauma of existence, we can say a trauma of birth, like trauma that constitutes subject as such. Every subject is already post-traumatic subject. Any particular instance of trauma, for example, trauma of losing husband, would have traumatic quality, would be only secondary trauma, and would have traumatic quality only because it reminds of the more initial trauma. So it's not, which means that any trauma is it's not just about a certain traumatic event localized in this event, but it's also simultaneously the collapse of everything else. It's if it's initiation, it's revelation about how horrible is existence as such, how it's impossible, for example, to live in this world, how world is horrible. It's not never about the loss of particular person, for example, but just about everything else too. And this also implies that this distinction of those who are traumatized and those who are not traumatized, it's not just that simple that some people are traumatized and some not traumatized. It just means those who are not traumatized, from this perspective, they just can conceal this rupture at the core of their self well. And therapy would be seen from this perspective as something that works not to overcome trauma, but rather to install the illusion of coherency, which in case of widows is not possible because it's hard for them to unsee the rupture that they witness, and simultaneously not only mourn their husbands, but also be disillusioned in a way in the whole world, witnessing the horror of existence in the world. And this is, I think, what trauma as initiation represents. So widows would say that Alexandra Kolesnik, the moment of when she finds out about the death of her husband, that is abyss without time and space and nothing, the witnessing the nothing, just existing through some kind of existence, witnessing this rupture, we can say. And Oksana Burkun would say that as a result, it changes in a way perspective, how you see life, and you get new comprehension of life, new well, for me, this is description of initiation, of revelation about the existence. It transforms you, this destructive power, and opens up the different world in different light to you. And I would write that this perspective of when we comprehend trauma as initiation, it allows more respectful approach to widows instead of trying to fix them and help to install back illusions of them of how everything is not so bad. This understanding of trauma as initiation would result in more respectful approach, because understanding that maybe others are just blessed with keeping illusion, and those are people who are not able to keep illusions, how life is amazing. But this also goes together, the comprehension of trauma as initiation goes together partially with the comprehension of depressive realism, because depressive realism position that claims that depression or other negative state, they have quality of giving some insights about reality, how reality is, making you more realistic, maybe. But especially in psychology, depressive realism means that it gives you knowledge. Depression gives you, unlike thinking of it as inadequate comprehension of reality, it actually comprehends it as adequate comprehension of reality. But like depression or negative state gives you more knowledge about reality. I would say that in this, I would partially agree with this perspective that you can use it, one can use it to see trauma as initiation, knowing reality better, gaining knowledge about reality. But I wouldn't agree in thinking that this knowledge is adaptive, because normally especially in psychology, depressive realism, they would even measure how realistic, how are you more realistic in your comprehension of reality when you said, for example. I think that this knowledge that you gain from trauma, when you initiated by trauma, it's not adaptive. What is adaptive is rather illusions that help you to adapt to life, that help you to live. And the type of knowledge that one gains after the trauma initiation, it's either too much knowledge, like it's different type of knowledge. It's not adaptive, but nonetheless, I would call it knowledge. Maybe even more important than adaptive knowledge. It's just knowing world too well, so well that you find out, encounter impossibility of living in this world. It's excess of knowledge. So I would introduce the concept of trauma knowledge and trauma speech, and which call, both of them, they call for the redefinition of comprehension of the concept of knowledge. That knowledge can be non-adaptive, it's still knowledge, something that you cannot measure. And this kind of trauma knowledge is rather non-knowledge or rapture of knowledge, because it's coincidence with the rapture in a self, rapture in existence even. It's the point where words collapse. And in relation to trauma knowledge, talking and language is rather means to conceal trauma initiation. So any articulation of a narrative is escaping, concealing from it. And what initially therapy was aimed for, trauma therapy, is to constitute a narrative that would kind of feel the rupture, feel the gap, the rupture in the comprehension of self, which is a traumatic event. But from this perspective, it just reinstalls the illusion. It might be necessary for survival, but it's still concealing initiation of trauma. It's escaping from what is there, of what can trauma tell you, even without using a language. So language, normal language and normal knowledge would just rather be aims of concealing trauma knowledge and trauma language, running away from it. And maybe some of the instances, and trauma sufferers, they would often say that there are not enough words. There are no words to describe what they went through. It's like the point where language fails, and very statement, this attempts to state within the language, the collapse of language, like there are no words, or there is nothing to say, or there is nothing that could be done. Those instances to include in the language the impossibility of language, that would be maybe the instances of trauma, manifestation of trauma knowledge and manifestation of trauma speech. And the last point is comprehending therapy as communion rather than seen as an attempt to fix or attempt to cure. Communion, again, very strange word, but nonetheless, understanding communion as understanding it as being together, as something interrelational, as opposed to attempt of fixing person. And it's also, in my comprehension, could be alternative. This comprehension of therapy could serve as an alternative to existing positive bias that exists in our therapeutic culture and defines therapy. And positive bias is denial or invalidation of negative feelings, like when someone is manifesting suffering, it would be denied. And from the problem, another problem was this positive bias in therapeutic culture, that those who are not traumatized, they are seen as superior. In a way, what is implied is they are proper type of human being who supposed to, not supposed to, if they are therapists, guide those who are traumatized, which are comprehended as from this perspective as people who are less adequate in their comprehension of reality, and those who are not traumatized supposed to guide those who are traumatized to the making them more like them, non-traumatized. And I'm not okay with this perspective. If trauma is initiation, I could say that it should be rather the other way around, like those people who underwent trauma initiation should teach other people, but I don't think it's possible to teach it. That's the problem. You cannot teach it through speech or through, at least not in that way. So therapy as a communion is my attempt to elaborate the alternative to comprehension of therapy as fixing other. And this problem of positive bias, this is what widows would encounter. For example, Tatiana would say that how she feels this society avoids widows, afraid of what they represent, like they're afraid of being infected by pain, and therefore try to deny their pain. Or Alina would say that about talking about the social media group that they created, that they found this created a sanctuary where they can talk with other widows and support each other, and where they feel understood, instead of the rest, like in the rest of society, where they feel abandoned. So communion as instead of trying to fix a person within trauma therapy, it's rather therapy with emphasis on interconnectivity, and which my question was if it's possible to take away the positive bias, in which, in my view, therapeutic culture, and any particular instances of therapy, like trauma therapy, they are based on positive bias. They work like implementation of positive bias, meaning you need to attempt to transform everything positive into everything negative into positive. And therapy, to a substantial extent, is just embodiment of this kind of process of a basically positive bias. Meaning you would be sent to therapy when you expose too much suffering, like widows might expose suffering. You would be sent to therapy, which would be seen as, from someone who is sending you to therapy, could be seen as an act of care, but it actually tried the way of denying you, meaning that you have to go transform the negativity into positivity, fix yourself, get rid, overcome your trauma, and then you'll be a more adequate, nice human being. So this, I'm wondering if therapy is it, if it's possible to keep therapy without the positive bias, even though I think it's probably not possible, because therapy is practice of the positive bias, transforming negativity into positivity, plus hierarchical relationship of a therapist who is supposed to be not traumatized one, or who is supposed to overcome their trauma if they had any, which is seen as a more adequate person guiding someone who is traumatized to on a path of their healing, meaning perceiving them as less adequate. And it doesn't go at all with the comprehension of trauma as initiation. So my question was if therapy is possible without positive bias and without hierarchy of therapist and patients. And I would call it communion, trauma as therapy as a communion, but it's questionable if it can be even called therapy. So while in common perspective, trauma is associated with inadequate grasp of reality, and this creates hierarchy of those who are non-traumatized, who are seen as inadequate, and those who are traumatized as less adequate. And the idea of trauma therapy assumes the superiority of non-traumatized and implies the attempt to fix those who are traumatized. So this therapy as communion would switch the emphasis on care, because there are two etymological meanings of therapy. It's cure and care, but we normally associate it in our culture with cure. If you talk about therapy, we think of cure. Except for maybe palliative care. This is when emphasis on not therapy, but on care. And if care is included in therapy, in discussing therapy, it would be included as something secondary and like not necessary, but main emphasis would be cure. Therapy is cure. And I'm thinking if you switch this perspective, if you see care as the main thing and cure as either secondary or not necessary in comprehending therapy, then it would work better with the comprehension of trauma as initiation and self as interrelational and as a way of getting rid of the hierarchy within therapy. So the emphasis of care, it's also care within the therapy understood as communion. It's not care in a sense that it's caring for someone out of pity or something, because it also implies superiority of the one who cares, but it's like caring not only to particular selves that are traumatized and represent the care, but also caring about what they represent, the trauma as such, this traumatic dimension of existence, without trying to escape it or deny it, escape it into idea of the hierarchy, who is more adequate, who is less adequate. And in certain way, those therapy groups that I'm mentioning, they would be suitable to discuss, to see as therapy as communion, therapy as deprived of positive bias. But my problem with those therapy groups is that they're still pretty much influenced, defined by the positive bias, because this is the groups where people who are traumatized have similar traumatizing experience, and they share their stories. But the problem that what they share, the trauma, talking about it, it is seen as less substantial. This context of the exchange, it's seen as a method of cure. It's not important what they say. It's like children reading in the textbooks a certain text and have to explain what this text is about. It's like for training matter. No one cares what actually text is about. And in this way, it's not the context of trauma that they're sharing, but it's seen as an exercise that is aimed at healing, overcoming trauma. So as a denial of trauma. And it's done normally with the expert who is guiding them towards the path of transcending trauma. So, yeah. The groups, the social media group that I'm mentioning, that Widows mentioned, the one that they created, and the one that where they support each other, it can be analyzed from the perspective of this conventional comprehension of trauma group therapy. Like they try and support each other, listen to each other, exist in the eyes of each other, recognize each other trauma, and therefore overcome, transcend through this their trauma, and restore their self. But I think it's too positive comprehension of this group, and I would suggest rather more negative comprehension of this group. Like they are not overcoming trauma. They rather create this group to preserve themselves from the rest of society, who tries to impose on them idea of the need of transcend trauma and restore self. This is maybe even a sanctuary where they not demand this from each other. This is why they feel understood. And this group is created by trauma, within a space of trauma, not as a way of overcoming trauma. I think it would be more genuine comprehension of the group that they have. So therapy reenacted in a form of caring communion would allow less denial and more recognition of the shared tragedy of human existence. Instead of trying to hide from it in a comforting illusion of possibility of transcending the negative side of existence reflected in trauma. So the therapy as communion would be maybe somehow deprived of a positive bias instead of denying the negative aspect of human existence, human self, and of the interconnectivity. It would be more genuinely recognizing and sharing it. And this is the conclusion where I'm suggesting if we see widows as a quintessential embodiment of human being, meaning that what they represent, they don't only embody their specific type of existence, of existence after trauma, of a post-traumatic self, but they also inform in a way about each of us, each of the human being, that it might mean that maturation, being adult, actually means in some form, to some extent, being dead while alive, and at the same time caring for someone else. It might be that it's not about self that much, restoring the coherency of self like we normally think, but it's shifting the perspective more to care. Somehow what they witnessing them, it turns out that for care you don't need self that is alive. Self can be dead, but they might face impossibility of going on, but at the same time they go on by being dead inside, caring for someone else. And precisely through being dead inside, they have the ability to take about, for example, other widows who are in a similar situation. So this idea of importance of care and interconnectivity and self as something secondary and illusionary that at the same time appears within relationship of care and disappears within the relationship of care. So what is more important, might be more important, is care that does not even require self, turns out, more important than obsession with self in our culture. Okay, that's it for me. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. Do you?
Hi, I do have questions. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Um, I like your diagram of old self, rupture, new self. And I was wondering if that horizontal line you draw under new self is a horizontal line that is full of ruptures, just like a barcode, you know, with the difference that when you scan it, it shows nothing. It shows a whole incomprehensible scribble.
I would even say, yeah, I like barcodes for some reason. So it's not just one rupture. Maybe Lacan, we can say that there is maybe main rupture, which is like it nothingness. It's witnessing nothingness. But barcode would be better because it's like many of them. It shows that it's defined by those ruptures. That's why we call it barcode. It's not. There's certain code in there instead of just being the darkness. But we can also say that there are no lines, it's just nothing. The lines are illusion. It's quite hard to show. It's hard to show that something that is absent is constitutive and something that is present or seem as a present actually absent. So it's like that's impossible to show even in a barcode. That's like the whole thing is wrong because I'm trying to show what is absent. It's quite hard. Something that is absent is defining, and we can say it about self. It's the defining thing of it is that the absence of it, and from this, so you can even by showing self even as a line, the point is that it doesn't exist in a way. If it's interrelational, it doesn't exist as an instance. You cannot capture it in a line or in a circle. So it's, yeah, for now the lines are okay and the barcode is great, but something better like showing nothing would be, or not talking even at some point. Thank you, Sylvia. Sam?
Hi. I was interested when you said palliative, when you were talking about care versus cure, because I think when I read your work, I feel like there's almost an implication we have some kind of duty of end of life care, maybe towards ourselves and others. I think that's the bit I get stuck on, because to live just for others, but the others are also an illusion. So it feels like you cannot make the distinction between self and other, that there is a duty of care to both, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great point. Problematic, but great. I forgot to say, like, care is great because every cure has the end result. It's supposed to have an end result, which is health. It's very optimistic, and this end result is health when everything is okay, success. It's not true. It's always illusion because it's temporary, and we can say that it's just what is improvement. It's just can be seen as a change. You know, what happened. You cannot improve it. You cannot get rid of it. You can you can introduce some changes, call them adaptive, but like it's problematic. You know, you can question if they're adaptive or improvement. This improvement and the end of cure, the end point is always illusionary. But if you stay with care, care is less hopeful. And if you generally go until the end of the care, it's always palliative. It always has a bad result. Person just dies. Or even as we normally witness, even without person dying, there's something in relationship that is painful we encounter. Absence of that is unfair. You know, you're not getting anything back from children, especially from people, especially from children. Like, it's even without losing a person, there is the painful aspect of care. You always fail in care. You never, like, it's always not only palliative but also unfair. You can never be good if you go enough, because where is the end point where you measure how good you are? Like, person died, you care about person died, you're horrible, you know, you do. But that's the care. Care is very traumatic itself, very tragic in its essence. But unlike cure gives the hope of no one can be good in care, and it's quite hard to claim that you're instance of care. It's like, that's why the feminist ethics is ethics of care. Unlike it's quite hard to have the instance of to be the instance of care, unlike the being claiming the instance of cure. Well, yeah, the other have to care too, but yeah, that's problematic question that the other have, but they don't. They have to, but they don't. That's why it's hard, you know. Thank you, Sam. Anyone else wants to ask a question before I stop recording? Are you waiting for me to stop the recording?
Hello, sure.
I do.
I've read that in post-Soviet countries there can also be a cultural memory of state-run asylums having been a institution that deprived many people of their freedom, and so when the public healthcare system would be so horrifying, I'd imagine it'd encourage people to be very silent about whatever that's traumatizing them. So, do you think that do you think that the general tendency in Ukrainian people is one towards, like in Western countries, searching for self-help, or is it similar, or is there some differences? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jake. It's, again, good question, although problematic. because what really happening in Ukraine is that it tries to be similar to West, and to be similar to West is to adopt the trauma culture, the therapeutic culture, meaning all the self-help and pop psychology and talking, sending people to therapists when they expose their suffering, like all of that, it considered progress to have it. And plus it also has the background of a post-Soviet background, where there was the phenomena of what is called psychiatry as the punishment, where people with the wrong points of view, normally intellectuals, would be sent to psychiatry, who would change or just punish them for their thinking, who would be claimed to have schizophrenia. So it was used as a political brainwashing mechanism, or mechanism of punishment. So all of them, and from this, Ukraine would try right now to escape into the, not to escape, but to establish more Western, which is considered more progressive, comprehension form of existence of society. And it also tries to be different from Russian one, which is even more horrible, the therapeutic society. It's like Russia defines itself in negating West. They try not to be like West, finding its own way, which is just the horror. So they're both horrible. This one, for me, the Western therapeutic society, but the Russian way, special one that just try not to be West, is even more horrible. And the place where I find myself is in Western critical self-reflection of therapeutic culture. Just quite problematic right now to do in Ukraine, because it's criticizing it or questioning it would be seen as you are, one would be suspected to be sympathizing with Russia. It's quite hard. First, you need to denounce Russia, then you can proceed to question Western perspective. So that's why I'm talking about it in English. It's still the fact that the therapeutic culture is still not native to Ukraine. It's just trying to adopt it, but failing. It's in some points it coincides with the anti-psychiatry, with Western therapeutic society criticizing itself. So from this perspective, I would think that I don't know what would happen next. Like, nobody knows, but there is nonetheless something important in this undermining, trying to adapt the Western perspective, and undermining by not being able to fully to do it fully, like questioning it. And in general, what is happening in the world, and partially in Ukraine, in Gaza, it's the very events are undermined the positive therapeutic societies. There's, we obviously witnessing that there are some negativities in the world, that it's not okay, doesn't feel like it's okay to try to transform them into positivity, and it might be not always adequate to be happy, like to try to be happy and to try to be autonomous, independent self from others. So we becoming, I think, more witnessing the interconnectivity and the negativity of the world, without me trying to inform about it. The world, like the world itself, is informing, questioning the positive culture. It's like, it's obvious right now that is no one needs to talk about it. I don't need to talk about it. Finally, not finally, it's horrible, but. Right, thank you, Jake. I will stop recording, and whoever wants to ask the question without being recorded, you can.